Today, I want to share with you one super important thing when you're evaluating your own English ability and your progress. Two things. One, how old are you? Number two, how long have you been learning English? Type away in the comments, I want to know. I get a lot of messages. David, I've been learning English for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever the number may be. And I'm not fluent. I can't speak English fluently. What's wrong? What am I doing wrong? Why is it taking me so long to be fluent in English? Here's the problem with that question. You see, you're assuming that if you've been learning English for 2 years or 5 years or however long that may be, that it is realistic to be fluent in English by that time. But the fact is that that's ridiculous. You're comparing yourself with other people your age. You might be comparing yourself with people you work with. You might be comparing yourself with other people in your university or your school. And that's not fair. If you're comparing yourself with native speakers your age, that is ridiculous. That's crazy. Think about it. If you're 20 years old and you're comparing yourself with a native English speaker who's 20 years old, think about how much that 20-year-old native speaker has been using English. And I don't mean studying. I don't mean studying grammar rules. In fact, they've probably never studied grammar rules. They've just used the language to communicate. They've been speaking it. They've been reading it. They've been writing it. They've been listening to it every single day from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep for 20 years. And here you are, you say you've been learning the language for, let's say, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, up to 5 years perhaps, and you think that it's reasonable and it's realistic to expect yourself to achieve the same level of fluency as a 20-year-old who's been using it every single day of their lives from morning till night. It's not. That's crazy. Let's talk about how to actually set realistic expectations. Okay. It's not reasonable to compare yourself to a native speaker who's your age. Okay, so what is reasonable? So let's say you've been learning English for 5 years. It would be somewhat reasonable to compare yourself to another 5-year-old, to let's say a 5-year-old native speaker, to a child, right? Because that's the amount of experience you have with English. But there's a caveat there. Even then, that might be an unrealistic comparison. A 5-year-old child has been learning the language and using the language. They've been understanding the world around them and using the language to communicate their own thoughts and ideas for 5 years straight, every single day, from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep. Think about how many minutes, seconds, hours that is. Like if you actually add up the number of hours they've spent and you compare that to how much you have been doing that. You see, when you say, for a lot of you, maybe not all of you, for a lot of you, when you say that you've been learning English for 5 years, what that actually means is that you've been kind of maybe studying it once a week. You might have a 1-hour lesson in school. You might have a 1-hour lesson at your university. You might go to some English institute once a week. That's not the same as using the language every single day from morning till night, from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep. So even then, if you've been, going to some English class for 5 years, once a week, that's not the same as the experience that a 5-year-old child has, if a 5-year-old native English speaker child has. It's not the same. So even then, it's a ridiculous comparison. It's an unfair comparison to compare yourself to a 5-year-old child who's a native speaker. If you're going to be realistic, if you're going to be reasonable, if you're going to be logical about this, here's what you need to do. Add up, sit down with a pen and paper, get a calculator, or you can use your phone. If you have a smartphone, the smartphone that you're watching this live on probably has a calculator on it. I want you to calculate how many minutes, how many hours you have spent using English to communicate. That does not include studying grammar rules or memorizing vocabulary, because native speakers don't do that. Here's what native speakers do, and here's how they learn the language. They understand the world around them in English. They listen to their favorite radio shows in English. They watch their favorite TV programs in English. They read books in English. They read restaurant menus and signs in English. And then they speak to the people around them in English. They write messages and text messages. They type text messages on their phones and type emails on their computers in English. They use the language to communicate. I want you to add up how many hours you have done that, and then work out how that compares with a native English speaker. And you might realize that the most appropriate and fair comparison that you can make between yourself and a native speaker is that if you've been learning English for 5 years, realistically, you probably have the same experience with English as a 2-year-old child, a 2-year-old native English-speaking child. And that's a realistic comparison. Why is this important? Because it's important in any journey, in anything that you do, in anything you want to achieve. You've got to track your progress, you've got to set goals, and you've got to monitor your progress. And I think so many of you are setting goals that are too unrealistic, that are far too high for them to be reasonable. You're setting goals that are impossible to achieve. And that's causing you to lose motivation. You're questioning yourself. You're feeling like junk. You're feeling like dirt. Just because you set this impossible goal for yourself, and then when you can't achieve it, you feel terrible. What's the point? Why would you do that? Instead, I want to encourage all of you to, one, be realistic. Be realistic with your goals, and number two, be realistic with what you're doing, with the way that you're investing in achieving those goals. All right? That's what I'm going to leave you with. Thank you all so much for watching. I wish you the greatest success in not just your English learning journey, but whatever other goals you have that you're pursuing. All right. Have a great night, everybody. Catch you later. Bye.